It's interesting, one scientist who was studying facial expressions,
associating ourselves with that person brings a type of confidence,
the moment my mind wanders in Salat, it's not going to go in a random direction.
which people from different backgrounds of the world, they feel some affinity, they can connect. We always ask, why should I offer my salat? Are my prayers even being heard? Is God even there? And how do I focus on my salat with all these distractions around me? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Today, to answer these questions and to unbox salat essentially, we have with us Murabbi Rizwan Khan Sahib from the USA. Assalamu alaikum, Ravi Sahib.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Jazakallah for making the time.
Yeah, Jazakallah for having me.
Jazakallah. So we'll jump right into the topic of salat, and starting from the actions of salat, and essentially to make a connection between the physical actions and the words that we utter. And then make it more visual probably for our audience, so that it is something which is relatable for everyone. So starting with Allahu Akbar, which is the very first expression in salat, what does it actually mean? Physically, and also that in words.
Yeah, so salat starts with a physical gesture, and this is a body language. It's a language in and of itself. So some of us, we might be struggling with the words of salat, the Arabic language, and even with the English translation. Allah is the greatest is an easy translation, but then holy is Allah, exalted is His majesty. Sometimes we need a translation of the translation itself. But there's a more basic language in salat, which is body language. And it's something so basic, you can even see it in an animal. If a dog runs up to me on the street, I'm immediately going to see that, is it attacking? Is it maybe scared? I can tell all of these things just by looking at it. And a dog also can tell with me. So it's such a basic language that we can understand it in other species. Then also, in our facial expressions, if I'm feeling happy, I'm going to involuntarily smile. If I'm feeling disgusted, my middle of the top lip is going to go up, and so on and so forth. So when we do these different expressions of salat, it's such a basic, intrinsic, and just like, fitrati, natural language, that we don't need any words to express it. When we do sajda in front of Allah Almighty, then even if we don't say any words in that sajda, there's an expression of submission there. If we were to pause and ask ourselves, what am I doing in this posture? We would feel something that this is what I'm doing. Ruku also, we're bowing down in front of Allah Almighty. If we think about it, it would give us pause. It reminds me of this thing that Malcolm X wrote in his autobiography. He said the first time when he became a Muslim, and in his prison cell, when he decided that I'm going to lean in front of God, he couldn't get himself into that posture. It's because he wasn't in the habit of kneeling in front of anybody. So a lot of times, just out of habit, we do sajda, not realizing this is a humiliating position. Putting my face on the ground and bowing down, what am I even doing right now? So without any words, if we were to just maybe even do a salat without the words, to just stand in front of Allah Almighty respectfully and just ask ourselves, my heart, what is it expressing? I'm going to go into ruku and not even say Subhan Allah Azim, but just do a prayer with body language and just express myself through ruku, express myself through sajda. So that is a language that a person who's struggling with the words, if they try at the very least to express themselves through that language that even animals can understand, the most basic language, then we could get to the first step of salat, of understanding the words of salat.
And that would mean that, the different actions which have been prescribed in the Islamic Salat have a wisdom behind them. Because, it's claimed that, of course, Islam is Din al-Fitra. And, our Creator knows us best. So therefore, all those actions have wisdom behind them. Definitely. And it actually reminds me, this concept that Khalifat Masih Sani as a Muslim has, Razila Talanho, has mentioned that, in Islamic Salat, all those different postures and states have been included, which people from different backgrounds of the world, they feel some affinity, they can connect, for expressing that humility in different cultures is different, right?
Yeah, they're natural and involuntary. It's interesting, one scientist who was studying facial expressions, he went to remote tribes that have not been in contact with any other part of the world just to see, do they have the same exact facial expressions that correspond with exact emotions as we do? And of course, he found that they do. So in the same way, our expressions of submission in front of Allah Almighty are involuntary, and they're intuitive, and they when we express them in that way, they will come from the heart. So that's a basic language of salat that doesn't need any words. And if somebody is struggling with the words of salat, I think this is something that they can start off with by trying.
I think that gives a lot of hope to individuals, perhaps, who are trying to memorize salat, or sometimes, they can't just recall specific words, that this body language in itself is so powerful. So going back to the actual words of salat, starting with Allahu Akbar in Arabic, what does it literally mean? And then that action that goes alongside, like, what is that meant to?
So Allahu Akbar means Allah is the greatest, which is very simple. And then that action of putting our hands up, this Hazrat Muslim Maud described that it's like we're leaving everything in the world behind. So I think there's a couple of things we can do that I do when I start my salat to help me focus. One is that we should think specifically of that thing that we anticipate is going to distract us. So if I was busy doing something, if I was playing a certain game, if I was having a certain conversation, the moment my mind wanders in salat, it's not going to go in a random direction. It's going to pick up where my thoughts were before salat. So I should make this gesture and say that this thing that I know is probably going to distract me, I leave it behind, and now I'm just going to focus on Allah Almighty. So with that gesture, we can leave something specific. Don't make it abstract like I'm leaving the whole world behind, but say that just as a starting point. Just say I'm going to leave this thing behind, and then I stand respectfully in front of Allah Almighty. Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest. He is greater than anything else that I think is urgent, that I think is important, that I think is beautiful, and I'm going to focus on Allah Almighty.
That is very profound. So, and repeating this expression over and over in all the different actions, right? I think reminds you of how great the God is, and then also like during these segments of salat as well, there could be different distractions, and probably it would serve as a reset to go back and basically recall and still as a Muslim says that is God still the greatest? Is a journey in itself, right? During salat.
It's reassuring in a sense that Allahu Akbar comes again and again, and in a way Allah Ta'ala knows that there's a lot of us who need to be reminded again and again that, okay, I started thinking about that thing I was working on before, but no, Allah is the greatest. He is greater than that thing. Or I started thinking about this other thing or this person that I'm attracted to. No, but Allah is greater in His beauty. So those reminders are there, assuming that during salat, it's not that I just make the one Allahu Akbar in the beginning, I'm set for like 4 rakat. No, I'm going to keep getting distracted. And it happens to a lot of people, not everybody, but it happens to a lot of us. And those Allahu Akbars are there as a reassurance that we're all in this struggle.
Absolutely. So, you're talking about like those different examples. And I want to actually just pause here and think about, some things which are so common, that keep distracting us. So, for example, if I'm a student, right, it could be my assignments, right? It could be my exam, upcoming, tests, whatever, which are making me nervous and anxious. And so in that context, what do you think, like how Allahu Akbar will really help me realign or basically come over that anxiety, so to speak?
So, when we start namaz, the whole reason we do salat is because we need to take a break from the world. Even a non-spiritual person recognizes that there's a value to meditation. There's a value to just disconnecting from everything and then just focusing on one thought or one thing. So in the beginning of salat, if we can recognize the value of leaving those things behind and taking a break from it, then we would also see the value that when we come back to it, we would look at it with a different fresh lens, with a type of refresher. So there's a lot of value in disconnecting, but like namaz is just an opportunity at the very least to meditate, to leave behind the world. And once we've left behind the world, then what becomes uniquely Islamic ibadat is to then worship Allah Almighty.
Absolutely. So I think beyond, that reset as well, it's actually also reminding us, I guess, that, God is more important than all those things. And not only that, but He is ultimately going to help us. And He's the only one who has the ability to make us succeed in those things which are actually causing us that anxiety or that fear. And also, in terms of beauty, as you said, like anyone who we are attracted to, we try to sort of, reflect that, that beauty has been created by God eventually. And then, He's the most beautiful.
That's another angle of Allahu Akbar, which is to say that Allah is greater than me. Because if I'm thinking that I'm going to be able to succeed in this, I'm going to accomplish this task, I have the ability and power, then we remind ourselves that no, Allah is the one who's going to accomplish this task. He is greater than me, and I should forget about that task for now and seek the blessings of Allah, because that's what's really going to produce the results that I need. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at Allahu Akbar as well.
So we'll move on from here. So after Allahu Akbar, we start with Subhanakallah, praising God. what is your experience like? Again, what is your story of like connecting with this portion of Salat?
Yeah, Subhanakallahumma has been a source of frustration for me, especially for a while, because the translation is such a challenge. It says glory be to Allah. So what am I saying? That glory, I hope somebody glorifies Allah, or glory be, he doesn't have glory, he needs, what does it mean? And holy is Allah. Even when we say his holiness, I'm not really 100% clear on what that means until I pause to think about it. Holy is Allah, that also again, Allah is pure, that sort of thing, but Allah already is pure. So why am I saying that Allah is holy? Holy is Allah. So it took me a little while to grasp, and I realized that I was actually just making it more difficult than it had to be. Or maybe the English translation was just being a little bit more poetic than was helpful for me. And Subhanakallahumma just basically means that those imperfections that I naturally start to attribute to God, that Allah is free of those. So that raises a natural question. Why would anybody attribute imperfections to God? There's a lot of reasons. I mean, for example, sometimes somebody has a vested interest in doing it. Okay. So if my prayers aren't being accepted, I could either accept that I'm not doing things correctly, I'm not praying correctly, or I could just say that Allah doesn't speak anymore. That's what the Maulvis of this age have done. They have said that, well, God doesn't really accept prayers. It's just to cover up their own faults. They have a vested interest in saying that God doesn't speak. He doesn't accept prayers. He's not all powerful in the sense that he interferes in this world. And then also, there's an aspect of it where we just forget that God is all powerful, that he's all hearing. So Subhanakallahumma reminds us that when we start our prayer, that Allah Ta'ala is not distant, he's near. He's not deaf, but he can hear me. And these are all things that we know. You and I know that. But at the beginning of prayer, if I ask myself that, is Allah hearing everything I'm saying right now? Then an awareness will kind of wash over me that yes, he hears every single word I'm saying. If I become aware that he is seeing me at this moment, that he knows these thoughts, this struggle that I'm having internally, suddenly I'm not like just mumbling into the abyss anymore. I'm actually addressing someone who is present. And that's the purpose of tasbih. That there's this theory that I have that God theologically, yes, is all-knowing, is present, he's all-powerful. But in this moment, when I become aware that he can accept a prayer in this second, not in an hour, not in a month, not that he's going to set into motion something and then it's going to happen. No, he can accept it right now. He hears me right now. He sees me. When that realization washes over me, that's basically what tasbih is. Because now I believe in this moment that God is all of those things.
That is extraordinary for me because, in my previous understanding, I just felt that, probably as attributing imperfections to God is more about, other people or other faiths, like which perhaps sometimes, in their current version, attribute certain weaknesses to God, as if, he can't speak or he can't see or, like all those different things. But really thinking about that it is myself who's attributing those imperfections to God, which is also actually contributing towards my lack of focus in Salat. Because if an entity is not physically present and I can't feel his presence and I can't feel his might, I can't imagine, standing in front of or before, the Prime Minister of Canada or a big figure or personality, right? And just then still, thinking about other things, right? Or using my phone or, stuff like that. I would have that entire attention, that person deserves at that time, right? And lack of that during the Mass actually is, that lack of comprehension, I think, which you're talking about. So that is extraordinary. So moving on from here, after we've talked about or we've confessed that, Allah is holy and he is free from all imperfections. The next part is about his hamd. What is hamd?
So Subhanakallahumma, the way we can look at it is that, tasbih is basically that Allah is not deaf. And hamd is that he is all hearing. So tasbih is taking away the negative and hamd is adding in the positive. So tasbih is basically Allah is not distant. Hamd is that he is al-qareeb, he is the most near. Tasbih is that he is not blind, and then hamd is that he sees me. And like I said, that when we become aware, then it changes our behavior. There's a thing where I think Hazrat Ibn Arabi said that the name of Allah, ash-shaheed, that he is a witness. It creates haya within us. Because when we know that Allah is witnessing me doing this right now, then we wouldn't do certain things that we do when we're alone and nobody's watching. It's because we're aware in that moment that he sees us. So hamd basically means that I am aware and I believe in all the attributes of Allah Almighty in this moment. So that thing of Allah Ta'ala being all-seeing, that's where it affects our behavior. So, when we do hamd, then, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said that when a person commits adultery or fornication, he's not a believer in that moment. It's not that he becomes a kafir in the theological sense, but in that moment, He doesn't believe that Allah Ta'ala is seeing him. He doesn't believe that Allah Ta'ala will punish him, all those things. So in the same way, when we don't focus in salat, it's because in that moment we don't believe that Allah Ta'ala is seeing me right now, that He is hearing me. We think that maybe it's a waste of time to say this. Allah Ta'ala is not really listening. And so hamd is basically that aspect of perfection. And then, Allahumma is in the middle, which is, oh Allah. And Allahumma is basically the name of Allah. As we get to know Him, that name means something to us. I kind of discovered something, I think it was this last Ramadan, where I was struggling with something.
Okay.
Where, sometimes when you, especially, when you wake up in the morning for tahajjud, you're a little bit disoriented.
Yeah.
And so in that time when I'm trying to do tasbih, I'm trying to think, okay, what was tasbih again? What are my misconceptions? I'm going through this process, but I'm just too sleepy to do any of this. But then that's when I realized, okay, if I just say Allah, Allahumma, just Allah, because that's why I'm getting up. I'm not thinking straight right now, but my heart is working, and my heart just knows one thing, that I want to connect with Allah. I'm looking for Him. When I'm sleeping, when I'm awake, whatever I'm doing, even when I'm failing, I have this thing that I'm trying to find Allah. So I found that, in that state of being disoriented, I'm just rubbing my eyes, trying to get to the bathroom and everything. If I do a zikr of just Allah, Allahumma, Allah, that you're the one that I love, and that's all that matters, then that actually becomes a very easy and simple type of zikr. So it took me a long time, and a lot of the things that I've learned have brought me back to the basics, that to not get tangled up in the complex things, but when you come back to the most basic things of just Allah, then it can become a lot more simple. So that those words of Allahumma are also very powerful. And if we use them by themselves in our zikr and remembering Allah Almighty, then it can help there too.
Absolutely. I think hamd is a very vast topic, and probably we'll get another opportunity when we talk about Surah Fatiha to come back to it. So moving on from here, the next expression is that we are again, in continuation of that praise. We say wa tabarak asmuka. What does it literally mean, and what is the analogy? How can we make it relatable?
The way I've understood wa tabarak asmuka is together with wa ta'ala jadduka, because they seem to both go together as a phrase in the same way that subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, tasbih and hamd go together.
Okay.
And there I think that's also the way Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Arabi rahmatullah alayhi described it, which is that wa tabarak asmuka is where we remember the name of Allah Almighty and also the many names of Allah Almighty. That's how He manifests Himself. We know Him through Allah. Then the Quran says Ar-Rahman also. And so many other names through which we interact with Him. Al-Ghaffar, the forgiver. Al-Razaq, the one who provides. Al-Sattar, the one who covers our mistakes. Al-Wali, Al-Hafiz, the one who protects us. These are all the ways that we interact with Allah. So these are His manifestations. So we say that your names, the name that you have, and also all these different names, they're a source of blessings, and that they help us to get to know you. And on the other end is Ta'ala Jadduka, which is that the English translation of Jadduka is majesty, but basically what it means, this word is not used often, so it's a bit challenging, but it basically has this meaning of ghina and azmat. It basically means how Allah Ta'ala is completely separate from us. His names are about His interaction, but the essence of Allah Almighty is completely separate, is free of any interaction with us. So we remind ourselves that Allah Ta'ala is far above these names and any interaction with us, and He is, sublime. So these two things come together. They're a little bit philosophical. They're a little bit, distant in a way. But, when I do my salat, and what helps me to think about it is to think about interacting with Allah, wa ta'ala jadduka wa tabarak asmuka. And then the other end is that there is an aspect of Allah Almighty which is completely beyond us. And that has a grandeur to it as well, that affects our heart, that I'm so small that there's
to be able to comprehend
the essence of Allah Almighty is just beyond me.
Absolutely. So I think, one new learning for me here is that, talking about wa tabarak asmuka, all those different names and attributes that I have benefited from is something that I can relate to. And then the blessing itself means that, like with lesser output, there's more, lesser input, there's more output, like, so with God's help, just how we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and I'm basically saying in the name of God, or I'm taking God with me, getting into that action, right? Which is basically with the hope that, that action will be blessed, or, I have Him, He has my back, right? So that Tabarak Asmuka, I think also, gives that strength, that, I mean, a person in a worldly sense, if we know somebody who has a a higher office, or a worldly sort of status, right? Just attributing ourselves to that person or associating ourselves with that person brings a type of confidence. And just mentioning, I know this person, like he's my uncle, or like he. So I think that name itself, is has that grandeur, and makes a believer, I think, confident, and probably that brings that affinity.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the last part of this prayer or this expression is wala ilaha ghayruk.
Yeah.
So what does ilah mean? And what is the complete translation of this, and how can we relate to this part?
Yeah, this is the most basic thing in Islam. But like I said, when you just look at the most basic things, that summarizes all of Islam. I could go for years worshipping only to come back to just saying Allah as a zikr and realizing that this is something that I can benefit so much from. So also La ilaha illallah is the most basic thing that we say as Muslims, but it basically summarizes all of Islam. And there Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam has mentioned the definition that's also found in some dictionaries, that it means La mahbub ali, wala matlub ali, and then there's a bunch of words, that I have no purpose, I have no objective except Allah, I have no beloved except Allah, I have none I obey except Allah. It basically means that Allah is everything to me. So it's essentially a negation that everything else that I love, that I'm attracted to, that I make a priority, that Allah is greater than that there is nothing outside of that. And I think the reason this expression comes at the end of this whole sana is that, again, it's a realization. If we had said it in the beginning, وَلَا إِلَهَ غَيْرُكَ, then it would have just been a statement of theory, you could say. That yes, of course, there's no God except Allah. I don't worship Jesus, or I don't do Hindu gods or anything. But when we say it at the end of this whole statement, that we've thought about to an extent of how Allah is free of all those imperfections, He is here. His greatness has affected my heart. He has all these beautiful qualities. He has these names that through which we interact with Him. And then His essence is something that is completely beyond our comprehension. So now it becomes a statement of fact that, then there's nothing else. Nothing else matters. La ilaha ghayruka. It's at that point, it should be a statement of the obvious. Whereas before it might have been an expression of doctrine. But now it's, and of course. So you can almost say that wa means, and of course there is no God except Allah. After all this, what is there besides Allah? There's nothing besides Him. Yeah.
Absolutely. So ghayruk literally means except you.
Yeah, besides you.
Besides you.
And also one thing to note here is that the word ka is used, I think, 5 times or so. In this whole thing, we're speaking to Allah Almighty in the second person.
Yeah.
And I think here, if we keep that hadith in mind of the Prophet ﷺ, that worship Allah as if you see Him. And if not that, then at least as if He is seeing you. So we can only do this expressing ourselves to Him in the second person if we're praying in that way. So I think that the purpose of sana in the beginning of Salat is to bring us to that point of ihsan that the Prophet ﷺ talked about. That if 5 times we say that Subhanaka, holy are you, wa bihamdika, then all this, that this is not supposed to be some third person or distant thing. We're supposed to start off with ihsan, that, oh Allah, I worship you, and if I can't see you, then I know that you are seeing me, because I've done tasbih. I reminded myself that you are seeing me in this moment, you're hearing me. So that second person can happen even if I don't see Allah. I'm at that lowest part of ihsan. So we can also think about that word of you, of ka, and by the end of sana, we should, through tasbih and through all these things, we should be praying to Allah Almighty as if He's in front of us.
Wow, this is so profound. Like when we start our salat, probably many times, we just rush through this part and, get to Surah Fatiha maybe, and then, sometimes maybe we don't take the opportunity to stop here and see, like how important this part is to actually, as a sort of like a precondition or, like preparing ourselves, for the rest of the meeting with God. So Jazakallah for sharing these, profound meanings. Jazakallah.